Welcome to Books the Biz, the show where real-world business meets real-world results. Hosted by business strategist Dan Paulson and veteran CFO Richard Beltry, this podcast breaks down the stories, trends, and financial insights shaping today's companies. Dan brings decades of experience helping leaders simplify operations, build strong cultures, and scale with confidence. Rich adds his deep financial expertise from guiding organizations across healthcare, construction, logistics, and professional services. Together, they dig into what's really happening behind the numbers and what it means for owners, executives, and anyone trying to grow a stronger, smarter business. This is practical conversation, real talk, and tools you can use right now. Welcome to Books the Biz.
Welcome back to Books the Biz. We are here for another exciting episode. Rich, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing great, and I was just dancing at the intro.
Yeah, jamming out. Well, we'll be jamming out to some strategery because that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Strategic, not necessarily strategic planning, but how companies love to talk strategy and fail to implement any of it. And you and I have seen this time and time again, and I think it's important to get companies and business owners to understand that you can talk about pie in the sky pictures all you want, but until you put effort into it, most of it never happens. In fact, I started this company almost 20-ish years ago, and one of the key stats when it came to doing things like strategic planning is 95% of those plans never see the light of day. So you go through the process, you spend the money, you do the work, and you never actually do what you said you were going to do in the plan. And I can relate to this coming from corporate America. I remember when I was working at my last corporate job, we typically had a yearly planning process that really kind of started in about September, wrapped up in about December, and usually by the third week in January, we were completely off track with what was going on. And this is a multi-billion-dollar company. This is companies that have resources and money to spend on this stuff. Rich, you come from, big four, big three, or however many bigs are left in the accounting world. What do you see there?
I saw a lot of that, and I saw a lot of the ability to get your focus messed up and basically looking at the most smallest thing. It's one of the reasons why I got to the point where I was like, I think it's time for me to go. It's time for me to leave.
Yep.
I was there when two of these bigger firms merged, and for about a year, we had meetings on whether or not we should use a double clasp file or a single clasp file. And the two firms had a difference of opinion on what they should have. So the problem always became, why are we having meetings on this for a year? And so you started to realize you're in the minutia. It just doesn't matter. And I'm looking back at it now saying, wow, that was probably 25, 26 years ago. And I'm like, 26 years ago, they don't even use files now. It's all digital. So it really wasn't worth it. But it's stupid stuff like that you just we're sitting there talking about it forever, but it just doesn't matter.
Yeah, I can think of I was actually hired to do a strategic plan for a company. And I explained my process because I typically approach strategic planning differently than a lot of them do. I believe most companies do strategic planning. They sell them by weight, not volume. That's why I say. So you get the big 3-ring binder with about 600 pages worth of stuff in it, of all this data that you've collected, and then supposedly somewhere buried in all that's the top 3 or 5 strategic initiatives that you're going to have. And anyway, I'll also kind of preface this by saying this was an engineering firm. So I explained the process. They agreed to the process. We get into the process. And we spent probably the first month going through and arguing between strategy versus tactics. And everything that their key leadership team would bring up, they go, well, no, those are tactics. That's not strategy. So you'd spend, again, hours upon hours trying to get to the strategic side of this, but they were spending so much time in the minutia of trying to decide if they were being strategic or if they were being tactical, that it was just insane. And in the end, the 5-page document that I promised them had to be 150 pages because there wasn't enough data in there that they were never going to look at again. So, so this is really what it boils down to. Is a lot of companies, I think, strategy is sexy in their minds, and you can agree with me or not on this, but they get stuck in the idea of dreaming big, but they don't know how to implement. And that's where the problem comes in, where it's between one class for two claps, right? It's really where you get sucked into all the little stuff that makes absolutely no difference and takes you so far off course because you really don't know how to implement what you want to implement in most cases.
I have one really good example where I was brought in on a company that was doing very poorly. Like they had made a mistake and the company's sales were going through the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And I was more of an operational type guy. Give me my sleeves, roll up my sleeves, let me into the box, give me the documents, tell me where everything is. The guy I was taking over for was taking bills they had to pay and throwing them in a closet because he didn't know how to pay them and he didn't want anybody to know about them.
Right.
And we basically found a closet full of paper, like, the old open the closet and everything falls out. There you
Yep.
go. Okay. So, I immediately went right into operational mode. Like, let's get this fixed. Let's get this cleaned up. Let's get, the point where we understand where we actually are. Cause I don't think they knew, but
Mm-hmm.
the owners were running down saying, we got to show the bank that we have a plan and we know what we're doing. And the big fancy spreadsheets and, fancy PowerPoints. That was the strategy part. When were they going to talk to us? Because we're sitting there saying, this is the way we're going to clean it up. So you really know if what's in those documents is correct. And eventually we wound up in a meeting where the strategy and the ops were talking to each other. And that's when things started to actually really move forward at a speed that made sense, because there was a very good chance we could have gone in two different directions, whether we would have crossed over at some point or whether we would have remained parallel and never hit the right targets. Like that was a potential. But when we got together and got that conversation going, then all of a sudden it was a powerhouse. We were able to actually turn it around because there was a very good strategy change. Operations wouldn't have known anything about it.
Right.
There was a very good chance that operation would have just been going right along exactly as they had before until we heard what the new strategy was. And it was a fundamental shift in who the target market was. And once that became a play, we went, oh, you know what? That makes a whole lot of sense. And then, boom, it just became a thing.
Yeah, and that's similar to what I see. I'm glad you brought that up because, again, everyone focuses on the pie in the sky idea. And in past episodes, recently we've been talking about AI, how AI is going to change everything. Well, I see companies talking about these big picture ideas they have, but they're not even in their wheelhouse. They're not even a strength of theirs. And a lot of times, again, it's because the heads of the business owners or the executives that are hired in, come in with their own idea of what things should be, and it takes the business in a completely different direction. Now, in some cases, maybe you need to do that, but in a lot of cases, you never talk to the operations people to understand where some of the bottlenecks or challenges are, and where key strengths are at. Because really, most companies would be far more successful leveraging their strengths than trying to figure out how to complement their weaknesses by pivoting or changing direction. And on top of that, then you also have no information or no action plan to actually implement what you're talking about. So there's a lot of high level stuff. We talk about SMART goals and whatnot. Well, goals are great and they assign tasks to people. But I'll take you back to my last corporate example where we had this huge planning process that we went through and everyone was assigned tasks in your entire performance evaluation was going to be based on how successful you were at that strategy that was being implemented. Okay, what happens when the strategy all of a sudden gets scrapped on the first month of what you're doing? Everything you've just based my performance on now no longer exists. How are you going to judge my performance at the end of that? Because you decided that that strategy was irrelevant. And I see this time and time again where companies will try something, it's not immediately successful, and then they'll pivot to something else. And now there's even less strategy to it because now they're doing it in a panic. And I liken it to, like when January, when you do your resolutions, your New Year's resolutions. Everyone's excited about working out on January 2nd. They're not as excited on January 15th. And that's kind of the same thing we see here with strategy is missing because you haven't built the habits into the team to actually implement what you need to implement.
I think that's another piece that really becomes something people have to realize, that workflows have meaning. We don't just do them because somebody said you need workflows. Okay. Workflows are just, that's your direction. This is your policy. This is how it works. I have one really extreme example in my head. When I went to work for the company that was putting medics on oil rigs.
Yeah.
Right. And I was probably, they had a series of, I think, 6 CFOs in a row. Like they would do a little contract, they would leave. They would do another contract, they would leave. And it was like, has anybody figured out why these people are, number one, why are they leaving? What's causing them to run for the hills? Because the concept of the company was fabulous. Okay. The financials were ugly, but why? Like, who was getting to the why? So I called a meeting. There had to be 25 people on a Zoom, right? It was half finance, half operations. And the guys in operations are going, we never met the finance department. Like, we didn't know who they were, So we start having this conversation. We start figuring out, why are we having an issue? And we started to realize you go through the workflows that were set up for here's how it's going to work. And operations guys are all basically calling out different problems. The oil and gas industry pays in over 90 days. From the time that the invoice is approved, they pay in over 90 days. Well,
and how long does it take to approve the invoice? Another 30?
So next to the workflow, I start doing the timeline.
Yep.
Right. Which I don't think anybody had ever done before. We got 90 days on the approval of the invoice, but it needed 2 signatures. One of them was a guy that was on the oil rig.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, well, I can almost tell you right now, we're going down the rabbit hole of this is the problem, getting those 2 signatures, because they had to be wet signatures. And we were in COVID.
No.
Okay. So start adding these things up and you realize we're not getting paid for like half a year. And we're issuing invoices every other week because we're putting people on there that have to get paid. So we're paying all these people and the payment for them is coming 6 months after they got paid.
Yep.
So you start realizing, okay, you're not collecting fast enough. If I gain you a day in collecting that money, we just solved part of the problem. If I give you a week, I'm a king. Okay. I'm going to get coronated here, but like no one had ever done that.
Yeah.
All right. So really it comes down to the strategy, great company, great idea, putting a medic on an oil rig that has connection to a land-based doctor, so you can decide whether you have to put somebody on a helicopter in the middle of the night or if they can wait for the boat in the morning. Like these are the types of things that save companies money from the finance side, but it's because now we just have to be able to implement it, to the point where they realize that the workflows didn't work, fix the workflow.
Yep.
Right. So strategy, great. Operations wasn't following. They didn't get it.
Yep.
I
I actually just worked through an example this week, very similar to that. So company, and they're asking me, well, the owner's spending all their time doing the work, billable work. and instead of running the business. And this person, he wanted to figure out, well, why I'm busy, I'm making money, why am I not getting ahead? And when I come to look at it, he pays his people a fair wage, actually better than fair wage. Good for them. Good for him. Great job. But then you look at what he's charging for the hourly rate, and I immediately raised a flag on this. And it's like, well, what's your strategy behind this rate? And then you've got all these different, products, I'll call them, basically services on the website. Oh, well, we don't do half those services. The website hasn't been updated. We really just kind of do these two. Okay. And, I didn't have all the information. So I was doing basic analysis on what I thought the going rate was, what they were paying people, and then what it actually was. And I went, whoa, you're doing 30% of the work yourself. This is why you're making money. But if you're not doing 30% of the work, you're upside down really quick. This is your problem. So if you want to run your business, then you got to change things so you're running your business and not be doing the work, which means you probably have to hire a manager to fill in your spot. And here's, I think what you're saying too is, you can have the strategy on conquering the world all you want, but if you're not aligning it with the operational side and not looking at the numbers and figuring out how those workflows come together, you're really just spinning your wheels, and you don't understand where the root problem actually comes from.
Yeah, that whole thing about operations and finance, working together, interlaced, it's 100% right. That turnaround we did that we were talking about before, where everything was in the closet, all the paperwork, right? The two guys that were the key to turning that company around were the operations guy and myself. Like we basically had meetings. It's just, if I was going to do something, I talked to him. If he was going to do something, he talked to me.
Yep.
As far as, he was going to order additional items from China, and he had to do it in a certain time frame because, Chinese New Year was coming up and they were going to shut down the factory. That had an impact that he wanted to do that many more orders up front and ahead of that Chinese New Year. So that was going to mean I was going to get a bill that was going to be more than usual. Okay.
Right.
So it went into the plan that I need that much money. This is what I need in the account. This is, how we're going to deal with it. When it came down to, he wants to order more, but in the beginning of that issue, we were on a, what do you call the type of financing when it's based on your inventory and your receivables? It was,
you're better at that than I am, man.
It'll come back to me. I'm sure it's an acronym that then I'll have to remember the acronym. So let's just say they were on financing that's what it required. So I needed to know that because I needed to have enough paid off on that financing so they would pay for the inventory. So everything had a movement. Now, if he was operating in a silo, I'd be sitting there twiddling my thumbs saying, I don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
So I wouldn't have been able to help him. It would have been, he said, she said, who was at fault for them not being able to get the inventory on time. It had to be cohesive. There's so much more that has to be cohesive between the two departments that, it's time to think about it. If you haven't thought about it before, think about it now.
Yeah. Just thinking about what your acronym might be there. Was it freight on board, just out of curiosity?
No, it's like an EPL. I'm trying to remember EPL. No, it's gonna kill me. I'm gonna go look it up. I'm gonna look it up. I'm gonna post it somewhere so everybody can see.
There you go. There you go. But back to the main point of what you're talking about there. I think this is where even small companies, I see silos. Everyone works in their silos. Finance works in this silo. Operations works in this silo. Sales works in this silo. Marketing works in this silo. And then there's the owner that's trying to figure out what the hell's going on with everybody. And it's not really clear because, again, he's getting different information from each group, but those information points aren't linking together because those groups aren't talking to each other. They all think that what they're doing is the most important and everyone else is just interference. And I see this time and time again. That's what I think got us talking several years back about all this stuff is, yes, finance is important, but how many fractional CFOs, for example, do we see that just focus on the number And that's, whoop, I blipped. If that's all you know, and that's it, then you're kind of limited on information. And this is where I see companies say, well, I need more sales, or I need more marketing, or I need more this, or I need more that. I don't think they know exactly what they need because they haven't done the broad view look, which again comes back to where strategy doesn't connect with the rest of the business because everyone's got their own little fiefdom that they're trying to protect and show how important they are. And the owner's just trying to figure it all out and they're getting stressed out on top of it all.
So it's an ABL, an asset.
ABL, there you go.
It was not an EPL, it was an ABL. I told you it would come to me, but yeah, it's one of those things that I come into these companies and I see that everything is siloed and you just go, oh, we got to break those down. We got to open it up. Like, I don't need to have a 150 person meeting. I don't have to have a 30 person meeting. I need a 5-person meeting, right? One from every one of the silos, right? And then let's make it so that there are no more silos. Open up the information flow, make sure that everybody knows what everybody else knows so that we can have a legitimate discussion. The minute it gets outside of that, and gets back into the silos, you've lost it.
Well, and that's where it really becomes important to get everyone to understand that the work that they do depends on the work that everyone else does and vice versa. Mm-hmm. And if you can get people through that and get them out of their own head and get them out of, trying to be dependent on, have everyone else be dependent on them because they are the most important person in the company. Mm-hmm. That's the biggest issue that I often run into. And that's where, as we implement the strategies, the systems that we go through, that's what takes all the time, in my opinion. It takes several weeks, if not months, to get people to communicate effectively back and forth and understand where the problems are and work together to solve those problems. Because in the beginning, everyone's going, well, it's not my problem, it's theirs. This is what I'm doing. This is right. Everyone should be following me. And when you have a group of 5 or 6 leaders, you're talking about your team of 5 to 6, when they're all doing that, that's where the issues lie. And you got to break down those barriers and get people to talk. And once you build those relationships to see, oh, this is where your part of the business connects to mine, and where if I'm doing it something this way, it affects how your work happens. If you're doing something a certain way, it affects how my work happens. And now we just got to figure out a way to cohesively bring those 2 points together. Yep. That's really what matters. And I think that's often what's missing in most of these situations where they're hiring a fractional pick your C whatever, that they're not understanding the big picture of that, because each group, whether it's CFO, COO, CMO, they're just going to look at things through their lens. They're not going to care about anybody else's lens, or they might try to, but again, they don't have the same level of experience in each of those categories. So that's where it really matters to have a broader array of people to tap into when you have those various needs.
Yeah, that's the if you have 5 or 6 silos and one of those doesn't have a person,
that's even a bigger problem.
That's a bigger problem. But I think that's the other thing too. As you're smaller, you are every one of those silos.
Right.
Like when you found the company, you are one of those. You were all 6, 5, whatever. Yeah. And when it comes time to discuss them, you're having a good old meeting in your head. But as you grow, it becomes too big and they start busting out and you start hiring people to help you with that. Then you need to make sure that you've got yourself covered on all of those areas. So you may still be covering 1 or 2. Eventually you get down to the point where you're not covering any of them, but now you want all of them to communicate with you. And then we get back to that communication discussion. Yeah. That the communication becomes huge. Because lately it's been awful. So it really has. It's been coming down to a lot of times that when I talk to people, I'm like, the problem you have here is communication. You have to be like, stuff has to be communicated. It can't be where you're not letting people know what's going on or what's in your head. If you're the founder and the owner and you're the CEO and running it, what's in your head? What's your plan? What's your strategy? And then how do you want these people to operate so that they're implementing your strategy?
Yeah, goes goes back to all those assumptions we constantly talk about making. And this is also why it's good to get, a third party in there to maybe help you assess where things are at, because as long as you're working within your own sphere, again, everyone's got their own little fiefdoms they're going to protect. The owner's got their own ideas. They obviously think they communicate way more than they do. Got news for you guys. What you're communicating is often a fraction of what you need to be talking about. And that's where we can come in and help. Rich, how do they get a hold of you if they need some financial expertise?
If you need some assistance or just to have a nice little conversation, give me an email at rich@xcxo.net and we'll chat.
All right. And you can do the same with me at dan@xcxo.net. Everyone, we will see you next time. Rich, thanks again. Always a good conversation. And we'll see you next week.
All right. See you then.
Thanks for listening to Books and the Biz. If today's conversation sparked new ideas for your company, the team at XCXO can help you turn those ideas into action. XCXO brings together seasoned executives, fractional CEOs, COOs, CFOs, and CXOs who step into your business with the experience, strategy, and leadership to drive real results. Whether you're trying to scale, strengthen operations, improve profitability, or prepare for transition, our experts help you move faster and lead with confidence. To learn more or start a conversation, visit xcxo.net. That's xcxo.net, your shortcut to stronger leadership and a better run business. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time on Books and the Biz.